There is no hood like parenthood. Hi, I'm Kanika Chadda Gupta. I'm a former CNN journalist, mom of 3, including twins, and host of That's Total Mom Sense, the podcast. Now, if I had $1 every time I heard, gee, you have your hands full. On my show, I interview change makers on their life lessons, legacy, and superpower of intuition, which I call our Mom Sense and Dad Sense. I've had the privilege of working with Mom 2.0, March of Dimes, and the White House, and have had some pretty amazing parents on my show.
Hey, what's up? I'm Kelly Rowland.
Hi, this is Chelsea Clinton.
It's me, Bobby Brown. Can't wait to share my story.
That's Total Mom Sense is a production of the Evergreen Podcast Network. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube so you never miss an episode. To join my tribe, visit that'stotalmomsense.com and follow me on Instagram at Kanika Chadda Gupta. Now let's dive into today's episode. The benefits to breastfeeding for mothers and babies are endless. We all know this. But despite recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics and the World Health Organization, initiating and sustaining lactation remains a challenge for many women. According to a recent study, although 79% of mothers in the U.S. initiate breastfeeding, only 27% are still breastfeeding at 12 months postpartum. The main societal barriers to breastfeeding and pumping, in addition to the general disregard for doing so in public, are the lack of facilities in the U.S. I know this firsthand as I breastfed all 3 of my babies and found myself pumping in my car and, much to my chagrin, public restrooms like the one at Port Authority all too often. When traveling to the Midwest, I discovered Mamava's lactation pods at the airport. I was away from my 9-month-old son for the first time ever and was so relieved when I found this pod near my gate where I could pump in peace. Fed up with pumping in bathrooms and borrowed spaces, much like my story, Mamava's co-founders Sascha and Christine Dodson applied their decades of experience in design and brand strategy to solve a problem that was largely invisible: the lack of lactation spaces in workplaces and public areas. Sascha and Christine took a human-centered design approach, starting with research, talking to breastfeeding people and employers, and creating prototypes of movable lactation spaces that could be easily implemented into their facilities. In 2013, they installed the first lactation pod in the Burlington International Airport, and Mamava was born. Their mission is to create a healthier society through infrastructure and support for breastfeeding. Sascha, it is an honor to have you on That's Total Mom Sense today.
Yep. Thank you. I'm so excited to share our story.
When I had discovered the pods myself, I thought, I need to get to know the founders behind this. And lo and behold, I got through to you. So,
well, being a breastfeeding mother of twins, that's incredible. It's one thing to do it for one baby, but to keep these 2 little people alive at the same time, you have all my respect.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I had a big twinsy pillow that I used for that. It was hung out on our couch all year. I want to take it back to when you were a kid, and it's sometimes, it's hard to figure out when we first noticed breastfeeding happening, but did your mom breastfeed you?
She actually did. That's a great question. And I think she was, I would say, maybe on the earlier side of sort of the natural, perhaps hippie movement there. So I was born in 1970, and my mother had not been a breastfed baby. We have these pictures of her, and she claims that she was fed on some sort of condensed milk and Caro syrup, and she looked like a dirigible, this inflated little baby. But she had 3 kids, myself and my 2 siblings, and she breastfed all of us. And she instilled that value in us. It was very much part of when I decided to have kids, sort of an expectation. She was also and is a wonderful cook and was there to support me. She was also somebody who didn't work outside the house. She raised us and had more of a traditional household in that way. So my challenges were very different from what she experienced. Never having to use a breast pump, for example. Breast pumps didn't really exist in the same way when I was a baby.
When you were kind of in grade school, did you notice that there were breastfeeding moms around? Like, was that something that you just kind of took note of?
I think so, because my mom's friends were having kids and they were also choosing to breastfeed. So it was a bit of a given. And I think that I tell the story about going to kindergarten, and my teacher introduced herself on the first day as Ms. Hutton. And she explained that, the designation of Ms. was not, attached to your marital status. And that lit me up. When I came home, I told my mother, I am going to be Ms. Mayor when I grow up. So I think that was just in me. I think my mom was a feminist, but the idea that I should be treated equally and that the world should be designed just as much by and for women as men was something that was innate.
Yes. Oh, that's great. And what was your journey like as a mother?
I loved my job. I worked for a design studio as a brand strategist here in Burlington, Vermont, where we're based. And it's a pretty isolated place. So all of our clients, or most of our clients, were spread out across the country and frankly across the world. So when I returned to work, I had the support of my employer to continue to breastfeed. I actually had a private office, so that was pretty easy. But when I hit the road to go and visit our clients or go to conferences, I found this indignity of having to use my breast pump in most of the only private place was a public bathroom. You have to attach yourself to an apparatus. You're kind of setting up bottles and plugging something in. So it was just a horrible, degrading experience and also gross. And half the time I was dumping the milk, right, that I was pumping, because I was like, okay, I can't feed a baby something that I prepared for them in the toilet. That's where the spark hit me to try to do something about it.
Yeah, that's something that I think we've all faced. And it's sad that it's been so many decades that women have to go through this. But TMI, but I remember lining the toilet of the Port Authority bathroom so I could sit. And yeah, I was like, what is going on here? Same thing. It's like I have my bottles, my Modella bag, and, hoping that the battery pack doesn't run out. Like, this is just ridiculous.
Right. Yeah. And that bag, you're carrying the battery pack and then the extra batteries and also the charger just in case you did find an outlet. And I remember actually hanging the pump at the back of the door and standing there, so kind of half disrobed and making the strange sound where people are wondering, why is this person not leaving the stall after 10 minutes or what have you. So
yeah,
definitely a design problem that needed to be solved. And I really believed in the idea from my work at the design studio that design could and should solve real world problems. And I had experienced it. It wasn't rocket science. It was about applying the human experience to design something to make that better.
Right. And there's never going to be no market for this. The more our population grows, we will always need to have some sort of place for mothers to feed their babies. Like,
sometimes it's not about pumping, as you suggested. Sometimes it's about a baby who just needs a less distractible location, right? My first child would breastfeed anywhere. My second one was looking for the party. So getting him to feed in a public place was also just going to be more challenging.
How did you and Christine meet and have this aha moment together?
Yeah, we were very lucky to come into each other's orbit. We met actually at the design studio, and she was one of the first people I actually knew who had a baby. She's a little bit older, and so I saw her as a mom who works outside the house and came back to work. She loved it and kind of those challenges. And she's very much the left brain, systematic, process-oriented person to my right brain, intuitive, creative. And so I saw her as a wonderful partner to connect to within the business and incubate. So we did have the privilege of having a supportive employer who actually loved the idea of developing our own product and brand ideas. And we did it in our free time within the design studio. And her skill set just complemented mine. And we continued to kind of, when we had time, sometimes it would be 6 months before we even did anything, but we had a moment of time between client engagements. We'd work on a business plan, or we'd work on branding, or we'd try to connect with designers that could help manifest what it could be. And it took a while, but eventually what happened was, in a way, culture caught up, right? We recognize that now, after the many years, we are long past breastfeeding. There was more and more legislation that was actually saying you had to have a room that wasn't a bathroom, a designated lactation space. So we actually had a business we could go out to the world with and raise a little money, and then struck out on our own and left the design studio. I left about a year before Christine did, as we kind of figured this thing out. And then when we started to really build the business, she came over full time.
And how did you get this business off the ground? Just to come up with the concept and then eventually the evolution of all the features, but like in those early days.
So again, incubating it at the design studio and seeing it as both a design problem in terms of needing to create infrastructure for pumping and breastfeeding, which are two, like, there are a little nuance between those two things, but also a brand challenge. So my discipline and background is in brand strategy and positioning. So we were creating a whole new category, and we had to get that story accepted into the world. And a lot of our effort was around the positioning and not having it be about shaming or scolding for either not having lactation support or accommodations, not having it be about hiding breastfeeding or pumping, but really having it be about a joyous space designed specifically for this function. And there has been so little design around this thing that sustains human life. It's actually kind of crazy when you think about it. And then because of legislation in the Affordable Care Act, which was 2010, we said, okay, let's start to seriously work on this. Now there is actually more of a mandate and a business case. And very long story short, after we put our first prototype in, we got such an amazing response. We incrementally moved forward, and then we got our first investors and hired our first employees at the end of 2015. It was a long journey because we were committed to our design job, and it was sort of, when is the timing to put all of our efforts against this? And that's scary, right? Because it was, leaving that salary and that health insurance and all those other things, figuring it out on our own.
And then there was just so much that it entails and boxes to check. I think the biggest is like compliance. So can you walk through what those guidelines are?
Sure. So when we were designing the pods, we wanted to, again, make sure they were as useful for a breastfeeding parent or mom and the baby who was traveling or with them, and just for that pumping mom who might be working in an office and multitasking. They have seats inside. They have the proper outlet for you to plug in a breast pump. We have 3 different models, actually. One is really designed only for using a breast pump, and the other 2 are more flexible for pumping or breastfeeding. We understood early on that we wanted them to be easy to find. So we created a mobile app that allows the parents to not only find, but access the pods through a smart lock. It allows us to keep track of the health and happiness of the pods because they can leave ratings, they can get in touch with us. It also was something that we developed very early on because we wanted to show scale and be useful for parents. So in the beginning, obviously, we only had 20, 30, 40 pods in the world, and an app wouldn't be that useful. So what we did in addition to our pods that were publicly placed is put any lactation room that we could scrape the internet for. So we got an intern who just said, go online and go to these college campuses or these convention centers. And if they have lactation rooms, put them in the spreadsheet and we will drop them into the app. So we actually probably have more lactation rooms that aren't Mamava than Mamava pods, but it just makes it much more useful for the parent who is needing to navigate and find where the pods are located or where lactation rooms can be found.
I did have a guest on the show, Debbie Edigari, who's with Village, and she broke down how corporations, are legally responsible to have lactation rooms. It needed to be different from a women's lounge because of the hygiene factor at play when it's connected to a bathroom. And so many corporates and, just even public buildings don't have that. So is that something that kind of works in your favor when pitching to, organizations that what's your lactation situation here?
For us, compliance has been a major driver. So nothing like getting a lawsuit threatened to actually motivate, in particular, an employer. And that's where the most robust legislation is. So in December of 2022, the Pump Act was signed into law. And it basically closed the gap on some of the lactation laws that were a little less specific about what had to happen and covered for the first time salaried employees. So it's interesting. The legislation in the Affordable Care Act was really, in I think, a fine way protecting that hourly wage worker. But the teachers, the people who are working in medical professions, the salaried employees who weren't necessarily getting the same accommodations now had them. And the other difference with the Pump Act is that it created a path for issuing a lawsuit potentially. So if you talk to your employer and they have not resolved the issue within 7 days, then you actually have a legal recourse. Unfortunately, that can be very motivating. I think most of Mamava's customers just want to plain old do the right thing and solve this problem in an elegant way, in an easy way. But for some, it's, oh, yikes, I'm going to get a lawsuit here if I don't figure this out. So that's definitely been helpful. And so it's, again, good policy, good government can lead to good business. And we're a great example of that.
That's wonderful. And tell us about the locations. Of course, there's the airports, but which ones and where can we find Mamava?
Yeah, sure. So that's been surprising and a beautiful challenge, I would say, in that when Christine and I were first figuring this out, our pain points were convention centers and airports. And soon what happened was every kind of business or employer had this issue. So hospitals and primary schools and stadiums and military bases. And for us, we're mission oriented. We want to solve the problem. But when you have such a broad customer base, figuring out what it means to sell into those channels, the complexities of installing, for an example, shipping, delivering, purchasing into each of those is very, very different. So that was something we have had to figure out. And also because we were creating the category and kind of creating the wave and then surfing the wave at the same time has been an interesting challenge for us. But I think it's put us far ahead of any competition now that there is more legislation because we've kind of figured it out in every single channel you could think of.
Yeah, give us a list of the airports that we would find you, though.
Oh, sure. I think we're at 120 airports, including some in Canada. So all the New York City airports. We're in Phoenix. We're in Las Vegas. We're in Chicago O'Hare. So all the big ones you can think of. And then some of the small ones, too. So they are totems for this beautiful, curved design. And we hear from parents who maybe haven't heard about Mamava and are just starting on their lactation journey that sort of like an oasis in this hectic environment. So airports are definitely a place where people learn about us first often.
Let's talk about the pod itself because it's really cool. Not only is it just I love the branding and the vibe and the furnishings, but there's also a keyless entry and it's self-cleaning. So how does that work?
So it's really designed more for a kitchen environment, for example, than something else, right? If you're breastfeeding or pumping, you're dealing with liquids and there can be spills. So it's designed to be easily wiped down. That is the responsibility of the facilities. So we have strong relationships with what the expectations are. And the app actually allows us to show our facilities the volume of users that, oh gosh, this unit is being used 10 times a day. You have to schedule cleaning, 3 times within that 10-hour cycle or what have you. We just have started getting some competitors, and I'll look at their interiors and it'll be clear that these are folks that are maybe just making phone booths and trying to pivot into the space because the chair isn't appropriate or comfortable for breastfeeding or pumping. It has fabrics that are porous that anything spilled on them couldn't be easily cleaned up. The outlet isn't put in the proper place and the desk or the shelf doesn't have the right space to actually set up a whole breast pump. So all of those things that we've really, really thought about as we've developed our product.
Tell us some of the wins, just milestones.
One of my happiest moments was when we actually purchased our manufacturing. So we were doing contract manufacturing. And in 2021, we actually decided, sort of post-pandemic and in the swirl of how we wanted to bring the business forward, that it would make sense to manage our manufacturing ourselves. And the power of going into a space where humans are making things is, in this day and age, amazing. It sounds like something. It smells like something. The colleagues who work in our factory, which is in Vermont, it's about an hour and a half away, this job means something different to them, right? And it's one of the most inspiring aspects of my job is when I get to go down there and actually see the units being made. And it's very tangible. And talk with my colleagues down there and talk about how they're connected to the work. So I think that's been a big factor. In general, just the people who have decided to work at Mamava and how connected they are to the mission is what keeps me going and is definitely inspirational for me.
And what are some of the challenges that you face that, our community can rally and help with?
As I mentioned, the pandemic was hard because the two key factors were people would see our pods by going out in the world, right? They would see them in airports, they would see them in convention centers or stadiums. And of course, that marketing window shut down with the pandemic as people weren't doing those things. And obviously, folks weren't going to work. So there wasn't the same demand for lactation spaces. The world was dealing with something much more important. It is interesting. We could see that our units in healthcare were being used more than ever. So we can see that data on our app. But of course, healthcare was busy dealing with the more important aspects of keeping people alive. So what actually bridged us, and it was by the skin of our teeth, was that we started to do more placements in warehouses for places like Amazon who were fulfilling orders for people who were staying at home, but there were still those essential workers that might have been breastfeeding. That was hard, and kind of reinventing after that has been a building back process for sure. We're still in that zone.
It's really remarkable that you're changing societal perceptions and our workplace culture at large with what you've built. What are some of the, testimonials that you've received?
Yeah, so I love this idea of environment and design connotes values. So just having the object in the space, even if you're never going to be a breastfeeding parent, says something about the facility or the employer or what have you. One of the things that the app enables us to do is stay very close to our moms and parents using the pods. And, being an entrepreneur is hard. And sometimes the very first thing I do to start out my morning is actually read the feature in the app, which is the words of support feature. So these we're recording on the 5th. So these came in today from moms. And, starting my trek back to HNL, traveling by myself with my baby, this gave me the boost and ability to get myself organized and feed my baby in peace. Thank you. Heart emoji. So I share these with my colleagues. It keeps us, going. I had this other one, which I really loved. Like, I'm in the janitorial department. I usually enter these just to tidy them up. However, I truly think this is a very thoughtful idea. The rooms are private and just enough for its purpose. Very nice. So that's an example of someone who is not even breastfeeding, but is just being moved by this idea of infrastructure for support for breastfeeding, and very powerful to see those and very helpful to us as well as we're designing the app and the products.
Do you think that it won't be long before Mamava pods are ubiquitous, where, we should see them at McDonald's, we should see them at the library, malls, like they need to be everywhere?
The next big opportunity is definitely retail. It's been the hardest nut to crack because even though there's a place where very many young parents are and new mothers need that support, the space designated to something that isn't selling something is a challenge. And so my team is working very hard on that. I know that for me, it would have made so much sense all those years ago that if I could feel secure that I would have a place to, frankly, breastfeed if I was out with my infant in those early months, I would have chosen a retailer specifically for that reason and sent my resources their way. So that's a big one for us. And I do think that we've tipped over to a place where, especially in public places like stadiums and convention centers and airports, is an expectation. And if you are not providing that for your guests, then you're going to hear about it. And that's the other thing that's really been powerful from that mom community, is harnessing them to say, hey, this is not okay. You all need a lactation room. And by the way, there's a great company called Mamava who can solve this problem for you in 4 to 6 weeks.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I love that we get to be a part of this change, this cultural shift. It's really incredible. Tell us about a mom sense moment you had, a time where you trusted your intuition as a mother. It's always heartwarming to hear these stories from my guests.
Just this year, my youngest, who is 18, was diagnosed with being on the spectrum for autism. Is an amazing child, very magnetic and good at many things, but was, having some sort of social challenges and I think learned how to navigate through that. So perhaps in the end, we'll all think, well, you weren't labeled with this and perhaps your lens of the world would be different. But in retrospect, thinking back about from the very early stages of this little human's life, I probably should have been paying closer attention. Is it normal to just not want to have snuggling and just, as a baby saying, close the door, turn off the light, and then jump into my crib, like those things? I benefited from some of those things. And to be honest with you, I didn't have a good example. I had more examples of maybe not being alert to my intuition and perhaps being too distracted with solving this big problem as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, wow. I mean, I think you're being too hard on yourself. And I think 18 years ago, we didn't have the resources and the knowledge that we have now, where, there's so many organizations and pediatricians and, at the early education, whether it's school or daycare, there's so many touch points that help us through that now that thankfully exist. So yeah, it's all in retrospect.
I think there was maybe a little bit of a deferral. My husband is a teacher. And as we both look back on this, we think, well, maybe they just thought we understood something, or that if there was something going on there, we would have seen it. But sometimes things that are really close to you. And again, amazing human. So proud, going to go to college next year. Just a very interesting example of, as a parent, maybe not being in touch with my intuition to discover some of these things earlier.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for, the force that you are in realizing that there is a void with Mamava, because that takes an intuitive spirit too, that like, there's something missing here and I can fix it. So that's amazing. And now, lastly, where can my listeners find you and follow the company and advocate?
Excellent. Yes. So the app is the wonderful place to start, especially if you are breastfeeding or are sharing that with your friends. We are on Instagram and Facebook at Mamava VT. And we are also in LinkedIn. So if you're more business oriented and want to find out about how you can get Mamava into your employer, or if you are an employer, you can go to our website. We have all the tools to explain both the product as well as what your requirements are as an employer and what your rights are as an employee under the law. So a really good resource there if that's something that you are struggling with in terms of getting support at work.
Thank you. It has been such a pleasure. I'm so glad that we're connected, and it was an honor to share your story.
Thank you, Kanika. It was very, very fun for me to be here too.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. I hope you got some great takeaways from our conversation. Join my community by logging on to that'stotalmomsense.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe to That's Total Mom Sense, the podcast, wherever you listen, and be sure to rate and review. On socials, my handle is at Kanika Chadda Gupta on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and X. You can also find me on LinkedIn. My episode videos are on YouTube and YouTube podcasts with highlights on YouTube Shorts. Write to me at that'stotalmomsense@gmail.com. My team and I read all your pitches and feedback and are so glad to be in touch. Remember, always trust your mom sense and dad sense. Stay strong, super parents. See you soon.